We're going to begin with opening remarks by Teresa Mangum, who is professor in the Department of Gender, Women, and Sexuality Studies and director of the Obermann Center for Advanced Studies, followed by Christine Nabhan-Warren, who is professor in the Departments of Religious Studies and also in Gender, Women's, and Sexuality Studies, and is the Associate Vice President for Research at the University of Iowa. So welcome, Teresa, and then Christy. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful to have you here. My job is to very briefly welcome you all. I also wanted to just take a few moments to say a few thanks. This is the third Mellon Sawyer Seminar that we've had at the University of Iowa, which is such an honor for us. The first was on the traveling of manuscripts in the ancient world. The second was on imagining Latinidades. And now we have this wonderful plan for a year-long study of race and comics. So I'm so appreciative of the faculty members who have done the work of organizing and proposing these very compelling projects to the Mellon Foundation. I also wanted to just say quickly thank yous. First of all, to Corey, to Anna, to Rachel. We're so glad to have you back, and to Esther for incredible organizational work that will keep going on for the whole year. I wanted to thank the Obermann staff, Erin Hackathorn, who's back in the back, Jennifer New, and Jenna Hamrich, who have done a lot of summer organizational work for you all. And I especially thank our guests who've come from all over to join us. I can't tell you how I happen to live in the same house with Corey, and so I had a firsthand view of how excited he was as each of the guests said yes, they would come, and he would be ecstatic for a while and then settle back down and get to work. We're going to get to spend a year together discussing very tough topics: racism, sexism, ableism, and it's so exciting that we'll do that through a medium that includes so many readers and seers, I guess we would say. It's going to be important, I think, to approach these topics with the hope of moving forward together. It's not just literary study or visual culture. I hope this is a year of social transformation. I hope it's a year that opens up new conversations at the University of Iowa. I hope it's a year that makes a lot more space for people of color, for trans people, for disabled or differently abled people. I hope it's a year that really changes how we all think. And I'm so grateful that these folks have made it possible. The other thing I wanted to emphasize is, oh my God, I'm looking at the screen with the best colors you guys are going to see in a minute. I also wanted to say that the Obermann Center itself is dedicated to both support of individual scholars and artists, but also collaborations. And we really believe at the center that most of life's complicated problems can only be dealt with sufficiently with multidisciplinary collaboration. And I so appreciate the way that this entire year is dedicated to bringing scholars and artists together to really think and move forward together. If every group of scientists, if every interdisciplinary group included an artist whom they fully supported, the world would change tomorrow. Thank you all for being here, and I will turn over to my colleague, Christy Nabhan-Warren.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Teresa. And I want to thank Teresa because Teresa, those of y'all who know Teresa, is a force and brings people together. And this is happening in large part because of Teresa and the magic that she works to bring people together. So I don't have a whole lot to say, but my name's Christy Nabhan-Warren, and I'm 9 weeks into a new role as one of the Associate Vice Presidents of Research here at the university. And I'm just so excited to be here. I could be here today and part of tomorrow. I'm going to go visit my oldest who just started at Cornell College tomorrow, but I'll try to come tomorrow here as well. I'm just so grateful. As someone who does interdisciplinary, intersectional work, I so appreciate the work that you're all doing. And as a mother of 3 teens, 2 of whom I will say it's hard to get them to read. You know, they're not readers. The work that you're doing to draw attention to the intersectionality of race, gender, power, and how you're pushing back against the canon is bringing in readers, folks who wouldn't normally read, right? And so I'm so appreciative, both as a parent, as a researcher, and someone who deeply values intersectional, the edge work of intersectional work. So thank you for that. I'm excited that this is going on all year. As Teresa mentioned, I feel so lucky to be at a university where we have support and funding for this dynamic research, and I'm looking forward to learning from you, alongside you, and thanks to Corey for inviting me to address you briefly this morning. So thanks, and thanks to all the artists and creators here, and I look forward to hearing more about learning from you today and tomorrow. Thank you.
And if you will indulge me just a few more minutes, because this is the first of our events, let me say a little bit about the thought behind the Mellon Sawyer Seminar. I actually was going to begin by thanking many of the same people who have already been thanked. So if you'll excuse me, maybe I'll allow that Teresa and Christy have handled that very important aspect of my task now. This Mellon Sawyer Seminar, again, on racial reckoning through comics, is designed to facilitate conversations on and explorations of the persistent representations of race and ethnicity, again, as just been emphasized, often intersecting with categories of gender, sexuality, and nationality, among many others, in comics, broadly defined, and from an international perspective. To approach this topic responsibly demands engagement with difficult and often blatantly offensive material. But also, we hope, it allows for the celebration of previously unwritten histories, underrepresented perspectives, and desired futures, both from and for historically marginalized creators and readers. To help guide us in these often hard, but we hope rewarding discussions, we will be guided by amazing guests. I think you will be absolutely convinced when you hear our speakers how terrific they are. And we'll properly introduce them to you soon in turn. Our realized goal has been to present scholars and artists in dialogue, though many of our remarkable visitors blur the conventional distinction between critical and creative work, as you will find. We will also allow the notoriously imprecise concepts of race and ethnicity to retain their range and their variety despite their nebulousness. In other words, we aim to challenge the American tendency to bluntly reduce questions of race to black and white, literally and metaphorically. Our aim, again, is to necessarily confront and criticize, maybe even condemn, while responsibly historicizing and, whenever possible, to celebrate, affirm, and empower. For the seminar as a whole, we've proposed reckoning in both its neutral and its ethical dimensions as a summary term for our activities. To reckon is simply to count or account for, but the term also invokes the dreaded but inevitable day of reckoning, when past misdeeds and mistakes are tallied and consequences are faced. Reckoning can be daunting, if not terrifying, and take many forms, but it remains necessary and unavoidable. For this opening event, moreover, we're asking all of you to join us to reckon with the seemingly simple question, how do we look? So in asking how do we look, we pause to first ask, well, who is we? And is the question, how do we, whoever we are, see, how do we look, or how are we seen? How do I look? Seeing and seen may appear to move in equal directions, but of course these positions have been historically distorted and imbalanced, often with literally deadly results. Those in plain sight may also go unseen, including in popular culture. For the emphatically visual field of comics, such an apparently simple question yields complex and multifaceted responses, perhaps always tentative and partial, perhaps like the best comics, including some of those by people who were in this room, perhaps always subject to constant update and revision. While the topic of the seminar has arguably been relevant for the entire history of comics, and in that sense is long overdue, I also want us to acknowledge that it seems especially timely in the ongoing necessity of Black Lives Matter, an seemingly endless southern border crisis, appalling rises in anti-Asian violence, and the bizarre but too often effective misrepresentation of critical race theory, among many other things. In this context, I want to especially acknowledge our location in the Iowa City Public Library. Excuse me. As I'm sure all of you know, public libraries and K-12 school libraries are currently the target of almost unprecedented censorship of comics and books generally. At least, the most intense since the notorious juvenile delinquent panic of the 1950s. With the undisguised twist now that comics representing people of color and gender and sexual diversity have been the most prominently attacked. Fear has once again been directed at images more often than words, especially those that challenge white supremacy presented as a depoliticized norm and that repeat whitewashed or pinkwashed histories designed to stifle rather than stimulate racial reckoning. A regular target of these attacks and bans is comics that depict non-white and non-straight bodies. And so I believe our location within a public library and a library that maintains and defends its excellent comics collection is especially meaningful and important right now. And we're deeply grateful for the support and collaboration of the library. So, again, welcome to 2 days of hard, but I anticipate important and rich discussion. My colleague Ana Marino will introduce our first speaker, Professor Frederick Luis Aldama. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Corey. Thank you for all the people who's been involved in this fantastic event and all the things ahead of us. I had the opportunity to meet in person with Frederick Luis Aldama back in January 2013 in Columbus, Ohio, almost 10 years ago. He was, in that moment, he is the founder and the director of LASER, Latin Space for Enrichment and Research. And for me, it was a very emotional experience because I got my master's at Ohio State University, and to meet with Frederick Luis, that is for sure the most prestigious comic scholar in the field of Latin studies, was amazing and was a complete inspiration. Also, I was able to see in that moment his role model for students and young scholars. And he's been a role model for students and young scholars for many years, giving them support. Some of our students, or graduate students who got PhD at the University of Iowa on comic studies, are being inspired and have been having the wonderful experience of visiting him and listen to his advice. So he's a extremely generous and tenacious and hard worker. He's aware of the vital importance of comics and the complexities around the Latino community. Frederick Luis, in some ways, is 5 or 7 Aldamas in himself for all the things he does. Because he's creative, he's prolific, he is multi-talented, he has an ability to show himself and to make other people to grow and to inspire to the limits that are amazing. So let's tell you a little bit about him. So one thing I like to think is, if Jaime Hernandez were developing his characters, he probably will have be inspiring to do a Frederick Luis Aldama character, because for me it's like a hobby. You know, that if you read the Love and Rocket comics, and if you didn't yet, you should do. There is a character that is Hoppe. In the case of Hoppe, Esperanza Leticia Hoppe Glass, she's from California. The father is Scottish, the mother is Colombian. But in the case of Aldama, it's like he is born in Mexico from a Guatemalan Irish mother, moved to California with a father from Mexico. So he has all the elements to be a wonderful character for Love and Rocket. So I always think, wow, if I have to think someone in the scholar community that is a creator who will be an adding character, will be Frederick Luis Aldama, because he will do it. You know, I can see him involved. He's involved with poetry, with film, with creativity, doing books for children who are delightful, and animation. So as a father, he has the Aventuras de Chupacabra, Charlie, that is a bilingual book that now is also Carlitos Chupacabra, that now is also an animation piece that is fantastic. He also have con papá, with papa. So he has every level of a very complex and creative scholar. So we really are very, very happy and proud. So let me tell you a few other things that are very, very interesting. He's right now the Jacob and Frances Samper-Mosikier Chair of the Humanities, and he's also he got his PhD in Stanford. He's chair and affiliated also with the Ohio State as a distinguished professor, Ohio State University. Even now he's in Texas, but he has so many books that is incredible. And he's been involved in a very, very interesting way of being a scholar, because the way he developed the books, he was aware of the need to create a canon and to create a genealogy of history of the Latinx reality of community. So he took that heavy responsibility on his shoulders, sharing with many people as a co-editor of 9 different publishing houses and 9 different projects. And at the same time, he's been involved on creating expos where he combined Latino kids with Afro-American kids, so they exchange ideas about comics. So you can see him in the popular landscape of comic conventions and festivals, but you will see him on the space of research and a scholar and conference, but you will also see reaching the community, going to speak with teenagers, going to speak with teachers. So he has such a passion in so many levels, and at the same time he will be writing creatively and also scholarly. And his understanding of scholar work is the recognition of a genealogy. So he will go back to Gus Arriola to say, how were comics done in the past? How our Latino community was trying to represent themselves? How is this changing from the rural to the city? Who are working? How he's a lover of Marvel comics. He himself closer to Marvel, and he understands how superheroes are being evolving. He got an Eisner Award for one of his books. He deserves many more Eisner's Awards. So, we hope he will be. He's on the, Hall of Fame of Latins giving energy to our community. So we are super, super inspired and super happy to have him. So he develops amazing books that I really recommend you to read, because he will explain the different process of knowledge about the Latino community, but he also will give voice to the Latino creators. So he will do amazing interviews. So reading him is a way of learning in two different levels, to the level of theoretical about subjectivity and how the self is represent the necessity to build up a genealogy, but he's also a great listener, and he will make artists to give all the knowledge you need. So I love this kind of dimension of orality on his work. He also will be involved. I recommend you to see him in video, and he will do an amazing presentation, because on a stage he's super intense and beautiful. So, and what else I can see is I really like when he speaks about his life and the connection he has with comics, and he remembers himself as a kid who combines, the cape of the superhero with the wrestle mask. He has all the complexities in himself. So I am very, very happy. We are very, very happy to have him here. And he's going to give us a presentation that is entitled Geometrizing Ethnoracial Formation Narratives in BIPOC Teen Comics. This is the acronym for Black Indigenous People of Color. So I welcome here, and we are very grateful. Thank you, Frederick, Luis. You are our inspiration. Gracias, gracias, gracias for being here.
Okay. I think we've all been there, right, where we're kind of can't look up or even sometimes listen to how we're being presented because we're blushing, right? Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna have some fun today. This is, first of all, Corey Corey, Anna, of course, Rachel, Esther, and all the others. My goodness, thank you. This is a remarkable opportunity, moment. Thank you for inviting us all to be here in this space to learn together.
Our dad told us all these stories about growing up here.
Tell you it sucks.
Actually, I think he kind of loved it.
We came here as a family.
It's too dangerous for them to know.
It's more dangerous if they don't.
You're Superman? No, we've seen Superman before. We've seen him.
You told the boys you're Superman. Couldn't lie to them anymore. This is gonna keep my family together. Clark, it's gonna tear it apart.
All the times you were gone, you lied to me. You both did.
I can't just abandon the world.
The world will always need Superman. Right now, this family needs you more.
Superman and Lois, 2-hour premiere event, Tuesday, February 23rd.
Okay, so last year, for those of you who didn't see this, CW dropped its first season of its rebooted superhero TV show, Superman and Lois. The pilot races viewers through Clark and Lois's journey to adult life in Metropolis, working at a daily planet rife with layoffs, struggling as parents of tween teen boys, one with social anxiety and both suffering from an absentee dad, grieving over the loss of Martha Kent, reeling from the news that the Kent farm is about to slip into foreclosure. Beyond satiating my modicum of curiosity about how Clark and Lois parent, I'm just not that interested in adult problems. There's no spark. There's no life. I have enough of this in my own everyday life already. Rather, what my brain latches onto is the narrative of the twins, not only the excitement of following Jordan as he wakes to his superpowers, but how he and Jonathan engage with and act toward their fellow teens, including underdogs, pushing back at bullies and helicoptering parents, and the growing of nascent desires. My reaction to Superman and Lois points to a general trend in where I've been going to find my narrative pleasures lately. I've been pulled more and more towards superhero comics, televisual, and film narratives that feature teens, and especially teens of color. In part, this is driven by a certain nostalgia, a look back to a time when all wasn't so carefree, but when it did seem like there were infinite possibilities, a time when I imagined I could soar up, up, and away. A look back to our mind in bodies during this huge formative and transitional moment in life. A look back to a time when my physical, social, and imaginative world began to expand exponentially. And within this expansion, the increased testing and revising of my learnings and imaginings within and against different social, physical spaces as a teenager. My current research is all about superhero popular narratives that focus on teens of color and their growing of emotion systems. I examine comics that feature Amadeus Cho, New Hulk, Kamala Khan, New Miss Marvel, Miles Morales, Reptile, Humberto Lopez, Riri Williams, Ironheart, among others. I explore TV shows that feature, to different degrees of presence, BIPOC protagonists such as Teen Titans, Runaways, and the more tween than teen, Raising Dion. I also examine films such as Slight, Alita, The Darkest Minds, Logan, The New Mutants, and See You Yesterday, among others.
When we get this up and running, we gonna be out of here. Stanford, Morehouse, Spelman.
Hey, ring the alarm. Hey, whoa.
This is something Einstein spent his entire life trying to do.
We proved that time travel into the past is possible. If we just give it some time.
It's scary, but you inspire me. You going places, CJ, and since Pops is gone, I gotta make sure that you get there.
I don't need you always playing Big Brother.
I'm the only big brother you've got. NYPD, don't move!
Devin Walker, a 19-year-old black teen, was allegedly shot and killed by an NYPD officer. Walker was armed with nothing but a cell phone.
I am so sorry about all of this. If I could go back and fix it, I would.
If we just go back, get them out of there, then he's saved.
We only have so many times to get this right. Everything's gonna need to be perfect.
What's today's date?
June 28th.
Sebastian, this has to work.
We're too late. It's about controlling something we obviously have no control over.
My brother didn't deserve this. Just miss him, y'all.
How many times have you jumped back, CJ? We're not superheroes.
Where is the justice?
We can't do this anymore.
We only have 2 jumps left.
Where is the justice for our sons and our daughters? When will it end for the whole nation?
You gotta listen to us. You're going to get killed.
Get on the ground! On the ground now! Get down!
We see how pop cultural technologies of storytelling can and do create absorbing and expansive teen protagonists whose intersectional identities and experiences, racial, sexual, gender, class, are variously and vitally shaped within a social tissue interlaced with prejudice, fear, unfeeling, paranoia, and the lack of imagination. Using the visual and verbal technologies of comic book storytelling, these narratives can add and do tell us much about the struggles and triumphs of core identity formation for those violently pushed to the racial, sexual, and gender margins. I'm endlessly fascinated with teens. I read constantly the research to understand this wondrous development phase, and not just because I live with one. Like the phase from birth to 6 years old, adolescence, identified roughly as ages 13 to 18, is another huge moment in our physical, cognitive, emotive development. It's a time of when adrenal stress, sex, and growth hormones flood the brain. It's a time of physical and emotional awkwardness. It's a time of risk-taking. It's a time of heightened self-consciousness. It's a time of explosive attractions, and all of this is a cross-cultural planetary phenomenon. It's also a time of explosive curiosity and great creativity. Teens generate novel ideas. They see solutions where others may not. Their brain is responsive and flexible. They interface with abundant and novel experiences, stimulations, sensations, experimentations, and explorations that lead to the formation of massive amounts of new neural pathways that in turn leads to novel, creative thinking. It's a time when we develop a sense of our core selves as we engage and explore an ever-expanding social sphere. Paradoxically, teenhood is both a time of great creativity, neuroplasticity, and great vulnerability. It's a time when the brain's tremendous connectivity moves from the back to the front of the brain, the frontal and prefrontal cortex, the rational or executive areas of the brain where the processes of language, impulse control, prospective memory, that memory where we hold in our minds the intention to act in the future, all of this taking place in the frontal, prefrontal cortex. It isn't till late stage teenhood and early adulthood that we begin to see a more front to back balanced brain connectivity. But of course, all of this happens in time and place. The way we educate the executive brain varies according to the changes produced in time and place. And these changes are human-made. Today in the US, we see the making of an education system and social tissue that's failing BIPOC teens, especially. Society is failing to provide the everyday conditions for the realization of their full potentialities, for the good life, or eudaimonia, as Aristotle called it. I gravitate to those narratives that feature the otherwise identified as troublesome and misfit teen as superheroic. The superheroic narratives I'm pulled toward again and again strip down, then reconstruct and amplify the experience of teens under the watchful eye of restrictive identity systems powered by xenophobia and queerphobia. They are conventionally superheroic, coming into different superpowers like shape-shifting, teleportation, cyborgian badassery, general super strength, and intelligence. But they are superheroic because one way or another, they survive being patrolled, profiled, surveillanced, and silenced within a xenophobic, queerphobic, misogynistic society. Comics use both the visual and verbal storytelling technologies to generate these magnificent and idiosyncratic bundles of experience, both in our story world immersion, character, theme, plot, and in our aesthetic, design, gestaltic grasp. Put simply, the visual and verbal shaping devices invite us to experience a complex range of networked emotions. Just as a particular characterization or character-to-character encounter might trigger, say, rage in us, so too might the choice of color and line work trigger or amplify such an emotion. Simultaneously, just as we might experience affection with a character, so might we really like a comic because of its aesthetic design, its awe factor. The elements that make up the story world, character, setting, and themes, for instance, can and do accrue in ways that point us toward a dominant set of emotions, negative or positive. And by convention, the visual elements that go into the design of a given comic book that geometrize the narrative do the same. Sometimes the story world and aesthetic design emotion sets come to exist in conflict, but mostly they work together. They give us our emotion north. Sorry about that, as it were. And in so doing, also shape into the heroic, romantic, romance, tragic, comic, sacrificial, and suffering prototype narratives. Our emotion engagement with teen comics at the aesthetic level changes in time and place. In my youth, when my comics literacy was in its infancy, I would not have had the awe experience I do today with John and Stacy's masterful aesthetic design in shaping the story of I Am Alfonso Jones, and we have Stacy here with us today. Put otherwise, BIPOC creators of BIPOC teen coming-of-age comics use their networked brain to reconstruct a specific slice of reality in ways that yield a new product, artifact, action, thought, that activates the reader-viewer's network sense, emotion, and cognitive supersystem in time and place. I call this co-creation elsewhere. BIPOC teen formation comics focus on the formation of core selves, affect learning, long-term memory, consolidation of new memories, time perception, olfaction, posture and movement, decision-making and motivation, reward and pleasure, and actions and motor behavior. Hence, they can and do shed light on the struggles and triumphs experienced by real-world teens of color. Two interrelated concepts run through the vein of my work on BIPOC teen comic book narratives, the Bildung and the ethno-racial pause. I take the concept of the Bildung from Bildungsroman, novels that I read and analyzed as a college student, like Dickens' Great Expectation, Bronte's Jane Eyre, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, and so on, that focus on the formative education of the protagonist. To understand how creators shape moments of the Bildung differently for their teen protagonists of color, I formulate the concept of the ethnoracial pause. Those moments, usually character-to-character interaction in the narrative that amplify issues of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality in the formation of the teen protagonist. The ethnoracial pause identifies the expansive, those moments where we can kind of breathe with the protagonist in a given narrative where the teens experience, perceive, feel, think different degrees of self-information. Indeed, creators discussed and analyzed in this talk tend to build in these ethnoracial pauses in the moments in between the action. The ethnoracial pause happens in between the action and epic battles. They take place during moments of human connection, interaction, and action, allowing for fear and willful misunderstanding to begin to open to empathy and understanding. Miles Morales. Starting in 2011, Michael Bendis and Sarah Pichelli laid the foundations for a Latinx Spidey who had room to breathe and grow. I might add here that Michael did reach out to some of our friends and colleagues, right? Stacy, you know this, including David Walker, to make sure he was getting things right. The slow burn setup firmly anchored a teen, Miles, in a mixed-race family life, as well as specifics of place, Brooklyn. That is, they laid the foundation for what would become, over a near decade of storytelling, a dynamic and robust education of self-narrative. They created a Latinx Bildungs comic book superhero. Indeed, once bitten over this near decade of storytelling, we witnessed the unfolding of a doubled journey of the self. As Latinx teen Miles within the social stresses of being a high schooler at the Brooklyn Visions Academy, along with home life with New Yorican Mama Rio, a nurse at Brooklyn General Hospital, and African-American Papa Jefferson Davis, a cop and former agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. Double journey of the self. So yeah, as Spider-Man, discovering, then fine-tuning his superpowers to fight neighborhood and supervillain criminals. There are moments of overlap and intersection between these two education of self journeys that intensify the tensions Miles Spider-Man experiences as at once a singular and doubled self. I think readily of the ripping of the Spidey suit that reveals his face and brown skin within the public eye. This intensifies the social mirror that he's been negotiating as an Afro-Latinx teen and as a costumed superhero. It also collapses for an instant this double journey of the self. The I is Miles, and the I is another, Spider-Man. Importantly, this Bildung comic is very much anchored in the life of a teen, a Latinx teen. Miles' journey is one of a kinesis of consciousness, primarily driven through the Bildung's comic mode. His mind actively encounters and develops within and against the social, the many minds. This constantly growing and transforming self also learns to think, feel, and act in ways that transform this social. Indeed, as Miles' story moves from origin to superhero, he moves from proximate spaces of family and friends outward into a greater world. Latinx superheroes in mainstream comics, I argue, that for superhero narratives to soar, there needs to be the skillful and willful visualizing, or what I call geometrizing, of character, theme, and plot to guide our imagination. And this drives our co-creative insertion into the world. In other words, I argue that the skillful use of geometric shaping devices, perspective, mise-en-panel, layout, font, lettering, design, balloon placement, create a visually kinetic story, and that this is absolutely necessary with superhero comics. But I want to complicate this with the concept of the ethnoracial pause. Those narrative pauses that breathe life into BIPOC teen superheroes like Miles in ways that go beyond his superheroic battles. Saladin Ahmed and Javier Garon's run of Miles uses these ethno-racial pauses and extends them beyond school and family. They show how BIPOC teen superhero comics can contain the everyday political. In Ahmed and Garon, in issue 1, they include a newspaper headline that reads, "More immigrant children detained." The ethno-racial pause happens powerfully with Garon's visuals too. His urban landscapes aren't all skyscraper squeaky clean, nor are his barrios only cliches of the grim and grime. There's complexity in Garon's visuals of exteriors. In my co-directed qualitative study with Laura Wagner, a linguist, we determined that while the average reader of comics might not be able to extract the core emotional messages from a given comic book story, they all had emotional reaction to the splash page, that single image that fills the entirety of a page. Creators of color use the visuals of the splash page to create an ethno-racial pause in the narrative. They are used to compress, and within this compression, stretch our emotion response as focused on formative moments for teens of color. In Lolo Woods, the artist Danny uses the splash page sparingly and to great emotion effect. The story is set in a former mining town called Shudder to Think. The story world is filled to the brim with marauding, skinless, hybrid human-animal creatures, women, child, witches, evil energy that violently turns women's wombs into interdimensional sinkholes. Danny, along with queer Latinx author Carmen Maria Machado, uses the horror genre to speak to the plight of women and queer teens of color in society. The double protagonist and dominant filters of the story, lesbian teens of color and best friends L, Latina, and V, Black, the horror of their lives doesn't stem from, say, being bullied as queer teens of color at school. It revolves around central mysteries like why they suffer from bouts of confusion and forgetfulness and shock horror encounters with frightening evil creatures and forces that target the women of the town. Danny's visuals drive home how BIPOC teens experience negative emotions more as perpetual states than as short duration. The, say, normal way one experiences emotions of fear. In one instance, V's sensual encounter with Jessica turns, with the flip of a page, into a splash page scene of horror. Danny's geometrizing of V's posture and facial expression, along with the page design that tips everything downward diagonally from left to right, triggers in the feeling of shock and confusion. Not only does it act as a signpost in the narrative that we are to read this as an allegory of patriarchal society's violence toward girls and women, but it powerfully reminds us that as a queer teen of color, V can never take for granted the exploration of the pleasures and curiosities of her body with another's that's so important to the healthy development of her as a young woman. Indeed, as the narrative unfolds, V discovers a legacy of this violence against women, including Jessica's living dead mother. Stepping into the comic story world built by BIPOC creators, we experience the complex ways in which teens of color form their identities in their daily survival of built spaces. And I think Esther's work is on this, built spaces. Just as the world L and V inhabit create a constant sense of precarity of lesbian teens of color, so too do we see how male teens of color can't take for granted lives lived in urban spaces. The BIPOC creative team, Tony Medina, Stacy, here with us, John Jennings, geometrize the urban built space as one that surveils, attacks, maims, and murders young black and brown teens, like the eponymous tragic hero of their comic, I Am Alfonso Jones. They frame the narrative with Alfonso's murder, shot dead by a police officer mistaking a clothes hanger for a gun. As the story unfolds, they use the visual and verbal shaping devices to stretch the narrative into deep time and space, linking Alfonso's murder with long histories of black and brown peoples whose lives have been brutally cut short by police violence that upholds a white supremacist US social system. In the narrative, ghosts appear of contemporaries such as Amadou Diallo, Trayvon Martin, as well as Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Malcolm X. Stacy and John's visuals convey this feeling of oppression, geometrizing the built spaces in ways that convey the sense of suffocation and hostility to BIPOC teens like Alfonso. They are also careful to build in that ethno-racial pause, clearing time and space in the narrative for Alfonso to breathe and move in a world otherwise filled with violence. In the present case, the ethno-racial pause happens in the moments when, in flashback, we are with Alfonso as he confidently and with great joy freely navigates an otherwise racially confining and dangerous urban space. Stacy and John's ethno-racial pause includes these moments when Alfonso's deft and swift bicycle maneuvering create a blur out of the oppressively looming labyrinthine series of decayed, dark structures and the suffocating streets chock full of cars. BIPOC teen coming-of-age comic book stories hit with hard truths and clear space for the celebration of their imagination and creativity. In superhero comics such as Jin Yang and the artist team known as Gurihiru's Superman Smashes the Klan, racism and homophobia are present, but ultimately vanquished as the tween and teen characters learn to work together to knock down racist bullies and soar up, up, and away. Yang and Gurihiru choose to set their superheroic comic and use the color palette of the 40s comics. Superman Smashes the Klan in 1946, not only to draw the reader viewer's attention to the serialized radio story of Superman outing the real KKK for its deplorable xenophobic acts, but also to stretch deep into the surface of a post-World War II zeitgeist characterized by the myth-making of a happy-go-lucky, leave-it-to-beaver, everybody-get-along middle-class whiteness. By choosing to geometrize the story through the ethno-racial formation of Roberta Lee, this creative of color team wake readers to long histories of anti-Asian policy and practice. Indeed, all that Roberta and her family experienced disturbingly resonate with the continued anti-Asian violence ripping through the US social fabric today. In Superman Smashes the Klan, the disenfranchised win the day, including an empowered young Roberta who helps Superman bring down the KKK. Along the way, a lot more happens, including young Superman's own journey of discovery and acceptance of his own alienness. Flashbacks show us a young Clark struggling with destructive self-doubt that first buries his alienness, then bifurcates his sense of self. Clark Kent versus Alien. Yang and Gurihiru give shape to a series of these ethno-racial pauses whereby ultimately Clark embraces his alienness and comes into his full power as a warrior with a samurai top knot and identifiable Asian look. In this ethno-racial pause, they have Superman out himself as alien in the middle of a baseball stadium. I am from another place. As such, Yang and Gurihiru put ethno-racial subjects steadfastly at the center of American history, society, and its superhero mythos. As I wrap this up, I want to briefly examine an ethno-racial pause that Alex Sanchez, writer, and Jewel Moreau, artist, build into the middle of the comic book narrative, You Brought Me the Ocean. It's a pivotal moment in the formation of BIPOC teen protagonist Jake Hyde, son of Black Manta, as he struggles to come to terms with his difference, a nascent queer sexuality, and water-bending superpowers. Sanchez and Moreau use verbal and visual shaping devices to build into the story this ethno-racial pause that marks a turning point in Jake's formation of self. Jake falls back on his bed and stares up at the ceiling, trying to come to terms with his sense of being monstrous. Physical marks on his body and a social mirror that reflects back his same-sex desires as deviant. In a cascade of images, we move from his thinking that all of these feelings will dissipate if he could live elsewhere, looking up at a map on the ceiling, to the tight, bundled body at the page's bottom that conveys his deep anxiety and fear at not being able to be fully himself. Sanchez's narrative, coupled with Moreau's visuals of Jake's body posture and expression, tumble us through emotions of shame. He covers his body as he looks at the mirror's reflection, to anger as he sheds his jacket, to helplessness and loss of hope as he slumps over, falls from his chair, and holds his jacket tight. The black swirls intensify our sense of this ethno-racial pause as a hinge moment in his life, one that could lead to deeper confusion and darkness, or one that can lead to empowerment and emancipation. BIPOC teen comics are not escapist fantasy. Indeed, with the careful geometrizing of the ethno-racial pause, they can and do take us more deeply into how intersectional identities and experience of BIPOC teens survive and thrive in society today. They celebrate diversity as the ethno-racial pause of creativity and storytelling innovation. They forcefully remind that BIPOC teens, in all their rich, superheroic experiences, can and do wake us to the transformative power of our collective racial reckoning and radical openness. Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. If you haven't seen this movie, go and watch it and rewatch it and watch it again and teach it. Slight. The question to repeat for our audiences and listeners is, basically, how is this working within the space of the ethno-racial pause, especially given that it's a narrative, it's a super heroic narrative that really anchors us carefully in the material reality of a young Black man, right, who is, where everything is cut off from him, and there's a self-formation, reformation, that also in that reformation, oh my God, it's like, I don't even know where to start with this movie. It's so good. But his Bildung and his forming himself to be able to survive materially through these tricks, and his modification of his body actually ends up harming his body and himself, but he does it in order to be able to survive, literally, like, and then he becomes this incredible, I mean, it's like, for me, it's what Iron Man could never be. You know, Iron Man is entitled and privileged and white, and he comes to understand his own privilege and whiteness to a degree in and through otherness, right? Dr. Jensen, okay, and I'm referring to the Jon Favreau Iron Man. Dr. Jensen is eliminated, Iron Man is reborn, and is somehow like in touch with constantly his own mortality, which brings him empathy. It's like the reverse of all of that with Slight. And for me, Slight wins, like, you know, by a long shot. I think the other really important question is, and I didn't get into it here because we were focused on comics, is how does a film which is technically generating like a progression of unmovable or unstoppable images provide the ethno-racial pause? Where do we start to breathe? Is it in the content, in the narrative content, as we were just talking about with Slight? Or are there other places that we need to begin to look? And I've been looking at the audio. So if we go back to Slight and we look at the careful orchestration of the extra diegetic sounds along with the diegetic sounds, that's where the space of the ethno-racial pause opens for us to take pause, right? So go back to the soundtrack, see who is brought into, it's not AC/DC, right, which is Iron Man's kind of go-to. It's a very carefully composed soundtrack. So that's where I found that kind of that moment of asking us to step out and have a pause and to breathe with the character and to understand the struggles. The glitch in Into the Spider-Verse, for me, is also a moment of that, right? Technically, aesthetically. Taking us out of the narrative for a minute and asking us to reflect and to breathe. Yeah, Rebecca.
That A See You Yesterday seems to be an example of being stuck in the pause, like that they can't get past it, so it's just kind of Afro-pessimism. But I wanted to go back to the comics, and I really loved your last example, because one of the things, just formally, I was thinking about, you know, you're starting off with cognition, and then this focus, which I find so intriguing, the geometric structure, which is so neat, which is not my thought, how I think about teenagers' cognitive development. Like I think of that as sort of amorphous, messy, moving here and there. And so your last example is, I think that comes a good example of much less neat framing, right? You know, what are you doing with the gutter? What are you doing with the panels? How are you seeing emotional development? So what does it mean to configure the ethno-racial pause in these sort of neat frames? And, you know, how do you think, we think formally about that representation of teenagers' cognition in relationship to thinking about racism, racial reckoning, when I tend to think of it conceptually as messier. So I'm just curious if you think about it on that level of form.
Yeah, that's a really awesome comment and something for us to reflect on. And I think this, you know, speaks maybe to some of your work, and I know Stacy as well, and others. Okay, so you brought me the ocean, another one. You've got to, like, you know, this is one for the bookshelf to read and reread and to teach. But what I see here, Rebecca, and maybe you've seen this too, is when, like, superhero comics, the big two, even, you know, other publishers invite those who have been creating comics in the indie or alternative spaces, say, or the non-big two spaces, into the creative process and the materializing of the narrative. I think we get much more kind of generous moments of what we're identifying as the ethno-racial pause in the layout and the design. When you have more of those that are conventionally based comic book superhero sort of storytellers visually, we get the more, standard conventional 6 or 9, panel stuff, more conventional, splash page even, and so on. But I think even with Miles and Ahmed and Garon, there's something that's happening there where we are being asked more than I see in other comics to really, because they're attentive to the issues. And it's not business as usual in the way that they're reconstructing, our landscapes and our social and physical landscapes and our emotional landscapes. And so even though we might see a very conventional panel layout and design, it's still doing something within the panel that is asking us to slow down and to experience comics, superhero comics in a different way, fundamentally, right? Not be so driven by the epic battle, right, as the generator of interest, but now to kind of almost go into the spaces that you've created so beautifully, right? To think and pause and reflect and to kind of step into that. Other comments, questions?
Hello. I was wondering about the ways authenticity could factor into it, or I think about moments where the reception of moments like this is people will say, oh, that's inauthentic, or the writer isn't really reflecting what I feel the reality of that character would be. And so do you have any thoughts about the way that could factor into it?
We don't care. Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing in comics today is this incredible moment where, and we've seen it in the past, but really today, where, and I don't want to speak for you, but where the ideal audience is not that person that doesn't get it or doesn't care. Screw them, like, whatever, right? We're not, but that's not, you had your time. Guess what? We do that all the time. We watch, what is 90%, 99% of pop culture is asking us to do that work. Okay, well now we got like 5% of pop culture that's asking you to do that work. Well, if you want to do it, cool, we're open arms. You're not our ideal audience anymore. Sorry, out. We've got too many people that are, grooving on this, hungry for it, want it, and who are using this to transform their lives. That's my simple answer.
So it's been fantastic. Thank you so much. You open new spaces for thinking, to engage, to now navigate to your ideas who are going to be part of us. Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias.